My name is Eleanor Williams, and at 67 years old, I never expected to own a $2.3 million mansion. I certainly never imagined my son Richard, who spent years calling me a burden, would one day be begging to live under my roof. Life has a funny way of coming full circle when you least expect it. Before I tell you how I went from nearly homeless to having my ungrateful son beg for a place to stay, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and sweet justice. I was born in a small town in Massachusetts, the kind where everybody knows your business before you do. My parents were hardworking people who taught me the value of a dollar and the importance of family. I married my high school sweetheart, Robert, when I was just 20 years old. Looking back, we were barely more than children ourselves, but that was how things were done in those days. Richard came along 2 years later. The moment they placed him in my arms, I knew I would do anything for this child. He had Robert's chin in my eyes, and I swore I would give him every opportunity one never had. Life wasn't easy for us. Robert worked at the local factory while I took on various jobs to make ends meet. I worked as a waitress in the mornings, did bookkeeping for local businesses in the afternoons, and sometimes even cleaned houses on weekends. Every extra penny went into a coffee can labeled Richard's college fund. I was determined my son would have choices I never had. When Richard was 7, I was offered a management position at the diner where I worked. It would have meant better pay but also evening shifts. I turned it down because I didn't want Richard coming home to an empty house. Instead, I started selling homemade pies to local restaurants for additional income. I would stay up until midnight baking after Richard went to bed. "Mom, these are the best pies in the world," Richard would say, sneaking a taste of filling when he thought I wasn't looking. Those simple moments of pride in his eyes made every sacrifice worthwhile. Robert and I had our struggles, as all couples do. He dreamed of moving to the city, starting his own business, living a bigger life than our small town could offer. I wanted stability for Richard, a consistent home, friends he could grow up with. These differences created tension that grew over the years. When Richard turned 14, Robert announced he had taken a job in Chicago. He asked us to come with him, but I couldn't uproot Richard during his formative high school years. Perhaps that was my mistake. Robert left, promising to send money and visit often. The money came sporadically for a while, then stopped altogether. The visits never materialized. "It's just you and me now, kiddo," I told Richard the day we received divorce papers in the mail. I tried to hide my tears, but Richard saw through me. He hugged me fiercely and promised he would always take care of me. The irony of that promise would only become apparent decades later. I took on even more work after Robert left. There were times I was so exhausted I would fall asleep at the kitchen table while helping Richard with his homework. But I never complained. I was proud to be raising such a bright, promising young man. Richard excelled in school. He was class president, captain of the debate team, and graduated with honors. The day he received his acceptance letter to Princeton University was one of the proudest moments of my life. The Coffee Can College Fund, combined with scholarships and student loans, would make his dreams possible. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom," Richard said at his high school graduation party. "Someday I'm going to pay you back for everything you've sacrificed for me." I waved away his promise. "Just be happy and successful. That's all the payback I need." I sold our small house to help with Richard's college expenses and moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment. During his college years, Richard would call regularly, telling me about his classes, his friends, and his dreams of working on Wall Street. I lived vicariously through his stories, proud that my sacrifices were giving him the life I had always wanted for him. After graduation, Richard landed a job at a prestigious financial firm in New York City. His starting salary was more than I had ever made in a year. I attended his graduation ceremony alone, sitting in the audience bursting with pride as he walked across the stage to receive his diploma. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he told me at his graduation dinner. "I'm going to climb to the top, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about money again." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, and I had raised him to value family above all else. As Richard established himself in his career, I continued working despite approaching retirement age. My savings were modest, most having gone to Richard's education, But I had always been frugal and had a small nest egg set aside. I had simple retirement dreams. A small garden, perhaps some travel to see the national parks, and most importantly, time with future grandchildren. The first signs of change in Richard appeared subtly. His calls became less frequent. When we did speak, he talked more about luxury purchases and less about visiting. He seemed increasingly impatient when I would ask about his life or share stories from home. "Mom, I really don't have time for this right now," became a common phrase during our conversations. "I have an important meeting," or "I'm expecting a client call," were his standard excuses to cut our talks short. I told myself he was just busy establishing his career. I made excuses for him, as mothers often do. But deep down I felt the distance growing between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. Richard met Melinda at a charity gala in New York when he was 28. She came from a wealthy Connecticut family and worked in public relations for luxury brands. Within 6 months they were engaged. I received the news via a text message. The wedding was an elaborate affair at a Hamptons estate. I felt out of place among the wealthy guests in their designer clothes. I wore a dress I had saved 3 months to buy, wanting to look my best for my only son's wedding. "Mrs. Williams, Richard has told us so little about you," Melinda's mother said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What is it that you do again?" "I'm semi-retired now," I replied, not mentioning my part-time job at the local library. "But I worked in hospitality and accounting for many years while raising Richard." "How resourceful," she responded, before excusing herself to greet more important guests. I barely spent 10 minutes with Richard that day. When I tried to give him a family heirloom for his bride, my grandmother's pearl hairpin, he seemed embarrassed. "Thanks, Mom, but Melinda's wearing Harry Winston jewels today. Maybe save this for someone else." I tucked the hairpin back into my purse, along with my hurt feelings. Mason was born 2 years later, followed by Lily 18 months after. My grandchildren were beautiful, perfect in every way. I longed to be part of their lives, to spoil them as grandmothers should. I offered to move closer to help with childcare. "That's not necessary," Melinda said firmly. "We have a full-time nanny and a household staff." Still, the early years with my grandchildren were relatively warm. I visited when invited, usually 3 or 4 times a year. I cherished those visits, storing up memories of chubby hands and baby giggles to sustain me during the long months between. When I turned 62, I finally retired completely. My Social Security benefits and modest savings would allow me to live simply but comfortably in my small apartment. I looked forward to a peaceful retirement, perhaps with more opportunities to see Richard and his family. Then came my first health scare. Severe abdominal pain sent me to the emergency room, resulting in gallbladder surgery. Without comprehensive health insurance, the bills quickly mounted. I hesitated to call Richard but eventually swallowed my pride. "Of course I'll help, Mom," he said, sounding distracted. "Just email the bills to my assistant." He covered the costs, but I could sense his reluctance. During my recovery, he called only once and the conversation was brief. "You really should take better care of yourself, Mom," he said. "At your age, health issues can become quite expensive." It was the first time I felt like a burden, but far from the last. As my fixed income struggled to keep pace with inflation, I found myself cutting corners. I turned down the heat in winter, limited my grocery shopping to sale items, and gave up my basic cable subscription. Meanwhile, Richard's Instagram showed luxury vacations, a new summer home, and private school events for the children. Then my apartment building's heating system failed during a particularly harsh winter. The landlord promised repairs but warned it might take weeks. I called Richard, hoping I might visit for just a few days until the heat was restored. "This really isn't a good time, Mom," he said, irritation evident in his voice. "We're redecorating the guest rooms, and Melinda has clients staying with us. Have you considered a hotel? Or perhaps it's time to downsize to a more manageable place." I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment with furniture older than Richard. How much further could I downsize? "Of course," I said, swallowing my hurt. "I understand. I'll figure something out." I ended up staying with my neighbor, an elderly widow named Dorothy, sleeping on her sofa for nearly 2 weeks. Dorothy became a dear friend through this experience, one of the few blessings in this difficult period. Holiday gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable. I would save for months to buy modest gifts for the grandchildren, only to have them overshadowed by the extravagant presents from Richard and Melinda. The children were polite but distant, clearly coached on how to interact with their simple grandmother. During one Thanksgiving visit, I overheard a phone conversation Richard was having in his home office. He thought I was napping, but I had gotten up to get a glass of water. "Yes, I know the investment opportunity is time-sensitive," he was saying to someone, "but I've got my mother visiting, and she's becoming something of a financial burden. These family obligations are killing me." I froze in the hallway, the words hitting me like physical blows. A financial burden? I who had sacrificed everything for him. I who had never asked for anything beyond occasional help with unexpected medical bills? I returned to my room without the water, lying awake all night replaying his words. The next morning, I announced I needed to return home early, citing a neighbor who needed my help. Richard didn't protest or ask questions. He seemed relieved. On the train ride home, I wept silently, mourning the loss of the loving son I thought I had raised. The real turning point came when I needed knee replacement surgery the following year. Years of standing on hard floors as a waitress had taken their toll. The surgery was unavoidable if I wanted to maintain my independence. Richard seemed visibly annoyed when I called to tell him about the scheduled procedure. "Mom, this is really bad timing. I'm up for partner at the firm, and Melinda is planning our anniversary trip to Bali. I'm sorry for the inconvenience," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I'll need someone to drive me home after the surgery and help for just a day or two." He sighed heavily. "Fine. Text me the details and I'll see what I can do." On the day of the surgery, Richard arrived 30 minutes late, already checking his watch and phone constantly. He barely spoke to the doctor about my aftercare instructions. During the drive to my apartment, he took 3 work calls, discussing investment strategies while I sat in pain beside him. "I've arranged for a home health aide to check on you tomorrow," he said as he deposited me at my apartment door. "I really can't stay. I have a dinner meeting with potential clients." The home health aide never materialized. I later discovered Richard had looked into the service but decided it was unnecessarily expensive. Instead, Dorothy from next door checked on me, bringing soup and helping me with basic needs. When I called Richard the next day, Melinda answered. "Richard's in meetings all day," she said coolly. "By the way, we've been looking into some lovely elder care facilities in your area. They offer so much support for people in your situation." I was 64, not 94. I was recovering from knee surgery, not suffering from dementia. Yet they were already planning to ship me off to a nursing home. "Thank you for your concern," I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. "But I'm quite capable of living independently." As my recovery progressed, Richard's true colors showed more vividly. He forgot Mother's Day entirely. My birthday card arrived 2 weeks late with a gift card to a store that didn't exist in my town. My calls to speak with my grandchildren were increasingly screened, with Melinda claiming they were too busy with enrichment activities to talk. My retirement savings dwindled faster than expected. The medical expenses, even with Medicare, created a significant dent in my nest egg. I began to worry about my future, but was determined not to ask Richard for regular financial help given his obvious resentment. Then came the notice that my apartment building was scheduled for major renovations. All tenants would need to vacate for at least 3 months. With the local rental market far beyond my budget, I reluctantly called Richard. "I wouldn't ask if I had any other options," I explained. "It would just be for 3 months, and I could help with the grandchildren, perhaps give your nanny some time off." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Mom," Richard finally said, his voice cold, "we don't have space for you. The guest rooms are being used as Melinda's home office and my gym now. The children need their routines without disruption. You're becoming a burden with all these problems. Haven't you made any friends who could help? Or perhaps this is a sign you should consider assisted living." The word burden hung in the air between us. This time he had said it directly to me. "I see," I said quietly. "I'll figure something out on my own." I ended up in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, using a significant portion of my remaining savings to pay the monthly rate. The room was small, with suspicious stains on the carpet and a persistent smell of cigarettes despite the no smoking sign. But it was shelter. Richard visited once during those 3 months. He didn't come inside the motel room. "This is exactly what I mean, Mom," he said, standing in the parking lot looking at the motel with distaste. "You're not making good decisions. Do I need to start looking into guardianship options? Maybe you can't be trusted to manage your own affairs anymore." I was stunned by the suggestion. "Richard, I'm completely mentally competent. I'm only living here because I couldn't afford anything else temporarily." "Which proves my point about financial management," he countered. "I think we need to talk seriously about moving you somewhere with proper supervision and care." During this period, my contact with my grandchildren became almost non-existent. When I did manage to speak with them briefly on the phone, they seemed coached in what to say. "Grandma, Daddy says you're having trouble taking care of yourself," 8-year-old Mason said during one call. "Are you going to live in a special home for old people?" I later learned from a mutual acquaintance that Richard and Melinda had been telling friends and family that I was becoming senile and constantly asking for handouts. Nothing could have been further from the truth, but the narrative served their purpose of justifying their neglect. One evening, I received an unexpected call from Richard. My hopes briefly soared that perhaps he was calling to apologize or check on my welfare. "Mom, Melinda and I have been talking," he began without preamble. "We think it's time to discuss selling your furniture and personal items. When you move to assisted living, you won't have room for all those things, and the money could help cover your care costs." I sat in stunned silence. They were planning to liquidate my life, the few precious possessions I had, without even consulting me. "Richard," I said slowly, finding my voice, "I am not moving to assisted living. I am not selling my belongings. And I am not having this conversation. This is exactly why we're concerned," he replied, his tone condescending. "You're being irrational and difficult. This is elder care planning, Mom. It's the responsible thing to do." After ending that call, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and wept for hours. The son I had raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally now saw me as nothing more than a problem to be managed, a burden to be shifted to an institution. Dorothy visited me at the motel whenever she could, bringing home cooked meals and, more importantly, genuine friendship. After witnessing one particularly dismissive phone call from Richard, she could no longer contain her outrage. "Eleanor, what that boy is doing to you is nothing short of emotional abuse," she declared. "You gave him everything, and this is how he repays you? By trying to strip you of your dignity and independence." "He's under a lot of pressure," I said weakly, still making excuses for him. Dorothy took my hands in hers. "Stop defending him. No amount of professional pressure justifies treating your mother like an inconvenience. You deserve better, Eleanor. Much better." In my darkest moments, lying awake in that dingy motel room, I began to question my own worth. Had my entire life been meaningless? Was I truly nothing more than a burden, a problem, an obligation? Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket, making even simple tasks seem overwhelming. I stopped calling Richard, waiting to see if he would reach out to me. Weeks passed without a word from him. It seemed that unless he needed to discuss my care plans or address some problem I represented, I didn't exist in his world at all. It was a Wednesday morning when the letter arrived, forwarded from my apartment building to the motel. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper with an embossed return address from a law firm in Boston. My first thought was that it must be some kind of scam or perhaps another medical bill I couldn't afford. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting more bad news. Instead, I found myself reading and rereading the first paragraph, unable to comprehend the words before me. "Dear Mrs. Williams, we are writing to inform you that your uncle, Mr. Joseph Blackwood, has named you as the primary beneficiary in his last will and testament. As the executor of his estate, it is my duty to inform you that you have inherited assets valued at approximately $4.7 million. I sat down hard on the bed. Uncle Joseph? My mother's brother who had moved to Australia decades ago? We had exchanged Christmas cards for years, but I hadn't seen him since I was a teenager. I vaguely recalled receiving news of his success in real estate investments, but I had no idea he had amassed such wealth, and I certainly never expected him to leave it to me. My first instinct was suspicion. This had to be some elaborate scam targeting vulnerable seniors. I called the law firm listed on the letterhead, fully expecting the number to be fake. Instead, I was connected to a distinguished-sounding gentleman who confirmed every detail in the letter. "Mrs. Williams, I understand your skepticism," the lawyer, Mr. Harrington, said. "Your Uncle Joseph spoke very highly of you. He remembered how kind you were to him when he visited during difficult times in his life. He had no children of his own and wanted his estate to go to someone with integrity. He specifically mentioned that you exemplified the values he admired." I arranged to meet Mr. Harrington the following day, still half convinced this was all an elaborate hoax. He arrived at a coffee shop near my motel, impeccably dressed and carrying a briefcase full of documentation. For 2 hours, he walked me through the details of my inheritance: investment portfolios, real estate holdings, cash accounts, and even a collection of Australian opals. "We can arrange for immediate access to liquid funds while the rest of the estate goes through probate," he explained. "Your uncle was very thorough in his planning." I left that meeting in a daze, clutching a certified check for $250,000 as an initial distribution. The amount was more money than I had ever held in my hands at one time. My next meeting was with Harold Peterson, a financial advisor Mr. Harrington had recommended. Harold was a kind-faced man in his 50s who spoke in plain language about investment strategies and tax implications. "Mrs. Williams, this inheritance fundamentally changes your financial reality," he said gently. "You now have options you never had before. The question is, what do you want to do with this opportunity?" In his office, with the reality of my new circumstances finally sinking in, I broke down completely. Years of stress, worry, and hurt came pouring out in racking sobs. "I'm sorry," I gasped between tears. "It's just, for so long, I've been made to feel worthless. A burden. And now." Harold waited patiently for me to collect myself, then said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Williams, you were never a burden. You were simply treated as one by people who should have valued you more. Money doesn't change your worth as a person, but it can change how you allow others to treat you from now on." On the drive back to my motel, my mind raced with possibilities. My first thought, conditioned by years of maternal sacrifice, was to call Richard and share the news. Surely this would solve everything. He wouldn't see me as a burden now. We could repair our relationship. I could help with the grandchildren's education, perhaps buy a small house near them. I actually had my phone in hand, Richard's number on the screen, when I remembered his words. "You're becoming a burden with all these problems." The memory stopped me cold. I called Dorothy instead, asking her to meet me at the motel. When I showed her the documents and the check, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Eleanor, this is incredible," she breathed. "What are you going to do?" My first thought was to call Richard, I admitted, to tell him he doesn't need to worry about his burdensome mother anymore. Dorothy's expression hardened. "So he can love you now that you have money? So he can pretend the last few years never happened? Eleanor, think carefully before you let that ungrateful son of yours know about this windfall." That evening, as if on cue, Richard called. It was the first time I'd heard from him in over a month. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," he began without even asking how I was. "The renovations on your apartment building are almost complete, but Melinda and I have been discussing it, and we really think it's irresponsible for you to live alone at your age. What would you suggest, Richard?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "There's a state-subsidized facility about 40 minutes from here," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's practical. They provide 3 meals a day and basic medical supervision. We've already put your name on the waiting list." The facility he was describing was essentially a nursing home for indigent seniors, a place where people went when they had no other options and no one willing to care for them. And he had made this decision without even consulting me. "I see," I said quietly. "And what about my apartment? My belongings?" "We'll handle clearing it out," he said, as if discussing disposing of trash rather than the treasured possessions of a lifetime. "Most of that old furniture isn't worth keeping anyway. We can sell anything of value to help with your care costs." In that moment, something broke inside me, but something else, something stronger, came together. I thanked Richard for his concern, told him I would think about it, and ended the call. I sat in silence for a long time after hanging up, tears streaming down my face. But these weren't tears of heartbreak or despair. They were tears of clarity, of resolve. I was done being a doormat, done being a burden, done accepting scraps of attention and respect from the son who owed me so much more. The next day, I checked out of the motel and moved into a luxury executive apartment while I planned my next steps. The monthly rent was more than Richard probably thought I had to my name, but it no longer mattered. For the first time in decades, I had options, and I intended to use them. With Harold's guidance, I developed a comprehensive financial plan. The majority of my inheritance went into a diversified portfolio of investments, designed to provide both growth and income. I allocated funds for healthcare needs, established a charitable foundation focusing on supporting elderly individuals facing housing insecurity, and yes, set aside money for my own enjoyment. My first major purchase was a stunning $2.3 million mansion in Brookfield Estates, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the region. The irony wasn't lost on me that it was located just 3 miles from Richard and Melinda's home, in a community they had often talked about moving to someday, when they could afford it. The house was magnificent, with 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, library, home theater, and beautiful gardens. It was far more space than I needed, but after years of cramped living, the expansiveness felt liberating. "Are you sure about this purchase, Mrs. Williams?" Harold asked when I showed him the listing. "It's a significant portion of your liquid assets." "I'm sure, Harold," I replied firmly. "I've spent my entire life making practical, economical choices. Just this once, I want to do something impractical and glorious." The day I moved in, Dorothy came to celebrate with me, bringing a bottle of champagne and happy tears. "I never doubted you deserved good things, Eleanor," she said as we toured the house. "But seeing you here, like this, it's justice." I hired a renowned interior designer to help furnish the home. I didn't want ostentatious luxury, but rather elegant comfort. Each room was thoughtfully decorated with quality furnishings, artwork that spoke to me, and small personal touches that made the large space feel like mine. My master suite became my sanctuary, with a sitting area overlooking the gardens, a luxurious bathroom with a soaking tub, and the most comfortable bed I had ever slept in. After years of making do with second-hand furniture and scratchy motel linens, I allowed myself to enjoy these comforts without guilt. Beyond the material changes, I began investing in myself. I joined a health club with a trainer who specialized in working with seniors. 3 times a week, I worked with James to improve my strength, flexibility, and overall fitness. The knee that had required surgery began to feel stronger than it had in years. "You're my most dedicated client, Eleanor," James told me during one session. "Most people half your age don't have your commitment." I updated my wardrobe, working with a personal stylist to find clothing that was both elegant and comfortable. No more faded cardigans and stretched-out slacks from discount stores. I chose quality pieces in flattering styles and colors. With each new outfit, I felt more like myself, more confident. I even started taking classes at the local community college, first a literature course, then computer skills, and finally a business management class. The latter proved particularly valuable as I became more involved in managing aspects of my investments. "You have quite a mind for business, Mrs. Williams," my professor commented after I presented a case study analysis. "Have you ever considered putting those skills to practical use?" That casual comment led me to join an angel investor group focusing on supporting small businesses owned by women and minorities. I discovered I had good instincts for evaluating business plans and mentoring aspiring entrepreneurs. For the first time in my life, I was respected for my mind rather than just my nurturing abilities. Through these new activities, I began building a social circle of my own. There was Walter, a retired English professor who shared my love of classic literature, and became a regular companion for concerts and theater outings. There was Maria, a fierce advocate for senior rights who encouraged my philanthropic efforts. And there was the investment club, a diverse group of individuals who valued my input and perspective. I also reconnected with my younger sister Martha, who lived in Oregon. Richard had subtly discouraged our relationship over the years, claiming Martha was a bad influence because of her free-spirited lifestyle. In reality, Martha had simply stood up to Richard's controlling tendencies in a way I never had. "I've been waiting for this call for years," Martha said when I reached out. "I always knew that son of yours was going to show his true colors eventually." Martha flew out to visit for 2 weeks, and the time with her was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. We stayed up late talking, went on day trips to places we'd always wanted to visit, and reconnected as sisters and friends. "You know," Martha said one evening as we sat on my patio watching the sunset, "you've always been the strong one, Eleanor. Raising Richard alone, working those jobs, making all those sacrifices. I don't think I could have done it." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel like I failed somehow. Like I raised a son who sees me as nothing but a burden." Martha took my hand. "You didn't fail, Eleanor. You gave that boy everything. More than everything. What he did with those gifts was his choice, not your failure." As I settled into my new life, I deliberately created spaces for potential reconnection with my grandchildren. One bedroom was decorated specifically with Mason and Lily in mind, with books, games, and comfortable furnishings. I wasn't sure if they would ever occupy it, but I wanted to be ready if the opportunity arose. Through all of these changes, I maintained a low profile in the community. I joined the neighborhood association, but didn't advertise my financial situation. I made donations to local charities anonymously. I had no desire to flaunt my wealth or seek attention. Then came the news about Richard's company. During a casual conversation with Walter, who had a son in the financial industry, I learned that the firm where Richard worked was undergoing major restructuring. "They're cutting the middle management tier significantly," Walter mentioned. "A friend of my son's who works there says it's a bloodbath. Anyone who isn't bringing in major accounts is vulnerable." I thanked Walter for the information, but didn't pursue the topic further. Richard's professional situation was his concern, not mine. But I couldn't help wondering if his focus on his burdensome mother had been, at least in part, a projection of his own insecurities about his position. As I grew more comfortable with my wealth, I discovered a natural aptitude for financial decision-making. Harold often commented on my prudent yet innovative approach to investments. "Most new wealth clients either cling to their money out of fear or spend recklessly," he observed during one of our quarterly reviews. "You've found a remarkable balance, Mrs. Williams." I smiled at the compliment. When you've spent decades stretching every dollar, you develop a certain perspective on money, Harold. I see it as a tool, not an identity. By the 6-month mark in my new home, I had become an active and respected member of the Brookfield Estates community. I hosted a small dinner party for neighbors, volunteered for the community garden committee, and participated in local charity events. People knew me as the pleasant widow with the beautiful gardens who made exceptional apple pies for the neighborhood potlucks, not as the suddenly wealthy heiress. At one such neighborhood gathering, I overheard a conversation that sent a chill through me. "Did you hear about the Williams family on Oakwood Drive?" one woman was saying to another. "Apparently, he's being let go from his firm. After all that showing off about being up for partner, too." "No," her companion exclaimed. "What will they do about that vacation home they just mortgaged? And didn't they just enroll both kids in that expensive private academy?" I moved away from the conversation, not wanting to hear more. Richard's financial troubles were not my concern. He had made it abundantly clear that family obligations were burdens to be minimized. I would respect his position by not interfering in his affairs. That evening, as I sat in my beautiful library with a cup of tea, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 months. From a rundown motel room to a mansion. From isolation to a circle of genuine friends. From powerlessness to autonomy. Yet for all these external changes, the most significant transformation had been internal. I no longer saw myself through Richard's dismissive eyes. I was not a burden. I was not a problem to be managed. I was Eleanor Williams, a woman of worth, dignity, and purpose. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflections. My housekeeper, Lucia, had gone home for the day, so I went to answer it myself. "Mrs. Williams," came the voice of the security guard at the neighborhood gate. "You have visitors. A Mr. and Mrs. Richard Williams are asking to see you." My heart skipped a beat. After 6 months of no contact, Richard and Melinda were at my gate. How had they found me? What did they want? Please let them through, Anthony, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I straightened my clothing, a simple but elegant cashmere sweater and tailored pants, and went to the foyer to await their arrival. Through the tall windows flanking my front door, I watched as a familiar car pulled into my circular driveway. The time for confrontation had arrived.
¿Y qué commitments?
My relationship with my grandchildren flourished. They spent weekends with me regularly, filling my home with the laughter and energy I had missed for so many years. I took them on educational trips, read them stories from my childhood, taught them to bake my famous apple pies. These simple joys, once denied to me, now became the highlights of my life. One evening, as I sat on my patio watching the sunset with Walter beside me, and the distant sounds of the children playing in the garden, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. You know, Walter said, seemingly reading my thoughts, there's an old saying that the best revenge is living well. But I think you've discovered something better than revenge. What's that? I asked, taking his hand in mine. Reclaiming your dignity. Setting boundaries that honor your worth. That's not revenge, that's wisdom. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. The inheritance had not changed my worth as a person, only my ability to ensure that worth was recognized and respected. The money had given me options, but the strength to use those options wisely had been within me all along, buried beneath years of accepting less than I deserved. Richard came out to the patio carrying a tray with coffee. This small gesture of service, once unimaginable from my status-conscious son, symbolized how far we had come. Mason wants to know if you'll help him with his science project tomorrow, he said. Something about growing crystals? I'd be delighted, I replied. Tell him to bring his materials after school. Richard lingered, seeming to have something more to say. Mom, I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry. Not just for the things I said and did when you needed help, but for all the years before that when I took you for granted. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The designer clothes and executive polish were gone, replaced by a simpler appearance and, I thought, a more authentic presence. We can't change the past, Richard, I said gently, but we can learn from it. I think we both have. He nodded, understanding that while forgiveness was a process, we were on the path. Later that night, alone in my beautiful home, I wrote in the journal I had begun keeping since my life's transformation. I reflected on the lessons of the past 2 years, the journey from feeling worthless to recognizing my innate value. I had learned that true wealth lies not in bank accounts but in self-respect and genuine relationships. That setting boundaries isn't selfish but necessary for healthy connections. That it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and rewrite the terms of your life. Most importantly, I had learned that while money can change circumstances, only courage changes dynamics. My inheritance had given me options, but it was my willingness to stand firm in my worth that had truly transformed my life and relationships. As I closed my journal, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I now faced life's imperfections from a place of strength and self-knowledge. The journey from burden to benefactor had been painful, but ultimately liberating. I had reclaimed not just financial security but something far more precious, my sense of self-worth. And that was a treasure no one could ever take away again. What would you do if a family member who once called you a burden suddenly needed your help? Would you offer assistance with conditions like I did? Or would you make a different choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always recognize your own worth, regardless of what others might say. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Richard and Melinda stood on my porch, looking so out of place that under different circumstances, I might have found it amusing. Richard's expression was a mix of disbelief and calculation, while Melinda's eyes darted around, taking inventory of everything she could see. Mom! Richard's voice held confusion and something else, a tentative hopefulness that made my stomach clench. What is this? What are you doing here? I gestured for them to enter. Please come in. We can talk in the living room. Their eyes widened as they stepped into the foyer with its soaring ceiling and elegant chandelier. I led them through to the formal living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens. Would you like some tea? I offered, the perfect hostess. Mom, what is going on? Richard demanded, ignoring my offer. Whose house is this? Are you working as some kind of housekeeper here? The assumption was so typical that I almost laughed. Of course, in his mind, the only way I could be in such a home was as the help. I'm not the housekeeper, Richard. I'm the owner. This is my home. Melinda, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly found her voice. That's impossible. You can't afford. This is Brookfield Estates. How could you possibly? I received an inheritance, I said simply, seeing no reason to divulge the details. My Uncle Joseph passed away and left me his estate. Richard's face underwent a remarkable transformation, cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally calculation. Uncle Joseph? From Australia? I had no idea he was wealthy. Why didn't you tell us about this? You never asked about my family, Richard. And frankly, you made it clear that my affairs were a burden to you. I was respecting your boundaries by not involving you. The barb hit home. Richard had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. Mom, you have to understand, things have been incredibly stressful. Work demands, the children's activities, social obligations. He glanced at Melinda, who nodded encouragingly. We've always had your best interests at heart. My best interests, I repeated slowly. Like when you put my name on a waiting list for a state-subsidized nursing home without consulting me. Or when you planned to sell my belongings to cover care costs. Richard at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Those were contingency plans, Mom. We were worried about your financial situation. But now, well, things are different. Yes, I agreed. Things are very different now. Melinda, ever the opportunist, jumped in. Eleanor, your home is absolutely stunning. You must tell us all about it. And we have so much to catch up on. The children miss you terribly. The children who hadn't been permitted to speak to me on the phone for months supposedly missed me terribly. I let the obvious lie pass unchallenged. How did you find me? I asked instead. Richard shifted in his seat. Barbara Thompson from my office lives in this neighborhood. She mentioned seeing you at a community event. At first, I thought she must be mistaken, but then she showed me a photo from the Brookfield charity auction. I could hardly believe it was you. I remembered the photo. I had made a substantial donation to the Children's Hospital fundraiser and reluctantly posed for a picture with the organizing committee. I see. And what brings you here today, Richard? We haven't spoken in 6 months. Richard and Melinda exchanged glances. He cleared his throat. Well, Mom, since you mention it, we've actually been trying to reach you. Your old phone number wasn't working. And when we went to your apartment, they said you hadn't renewed your lease. I had indeed changed my number and let the apartment go. I had no reason to maintain connections to a life where I had been so unhappy. We were worried, Melinda added, her voice dripping with artificial concern. But now we can see you've been more than fine. Richard leaned forward, adopting what I recognized as his business negotiation posture. Actually, Mom, we've been going through some changes ourselves. The financial industry is volatile right now, and my firm has been making some structural adjustments. Richard was let go, Melinda blurted out, apparently tired of the euphemisms. After 12 years of dedicated service. It's absolutely shameful how they treated him. I kept my expression neutral. I'm sorry to hear that, Richard. That must be difficult. It's a temporary setback, he assured me, straightening his tie. I have prospects. Several firms have expressed interest. But the timing is challenging with the real estate market the way it is. We had to list our vacation home, Melinda explained, twisting her diamond bracelet. And we're considering downsizing from our primary residence as well. The maintenance alone is crushing, not to mention the children's school fees. I waited, sensing there was more to this visit than catching up on their financial woes. Richard took a deep breath. Mom, seeing your beautiful home here has given us an idea. This place is enormous for just one person. You must rattle around in here all alone. I enjoy the space, I said mildly. After years in a small apartment, it's quite liberating. Of course, he nodded rapidly. But wouldn't it be nice to have family around? To hear the children playing, to have company at meals. And there it was, the true purpose of their visit. What exactly are you proposing, Richard? He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. We thought we could move in here, just until the job situation stabilizes. The East Wing looks like it's practically a separate apartment. We wouldn't be in your way at all. And you'd get to see Mason and Lily every day. They're growing up so fast, Mom. You're missing so much. The same grandchildren I had been deliberately kept from for years were now being dangled as bait. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. I see, I said, keeping my voice even. And what would this arrangement look like financially? Richard looked momentarily taken aback, as if the question were in poor taste. Well, as I said, this would be temporary while I secure a new position. We'd contribute what we could, of course, but with the children's education and our current obligations. So you would live here rent-free, I clarified. And I presume you would expect me to cover the household expenses as well. Melinda jumped in. Family helps family, Eleanor. Isn't that what you always taught, Richard? And just think how wonderful it would be for you to have us close by as you get older. You wouldn't have to worry about being alone. The implication that I needed their presence as some kind of insurance against aging was particularly rich, coming from people who had been ready to ship me off to a state facility just months earlier. When would you want to move in? I asked, curious to see just how presumptuous they were prepared to be. We could start bringing some essentials over this weekend, Richard said eagerly, clearly interpreting my question as agreement. The larger furniture might take a bit more time to arrange. I stood up slowly, smoothing my slacks. I need some time to think about this proposal. It's quite sudden. Richard's face fell slightly. This wasn't the enthusiastic response he had clearly expected from his formerly desperate mother. Of course, take all the time you need, he said, though his tone suggested he had expected immediate gratitude for his generous offer to occupy my home. As I showed them to the door, Melinda made a show of embracing me, something she had never done in all the years I had known her. We've missed you so much, Eleanor, she said. Family should be together. After they left, I sat in my garden, watching the sunset and reflecting on the encounter. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. After years of neglect and dismissal, after literally calling me a burden to my face, Richard now expected to move his family into my home because it suited his financial needs. Over the next few days, Richard called repeatedly. Each message became increasingly pressured. Mom, we need to know about the house situation. Our realtor has a potential buyer for our place. Mom, the children are so excited about moving in with Grandma. Lily's already talking about which bedroom she wants. Mom, I've got a lead on a position, but it would mean a significant pay cut initially. Having reduced living expenses would really help us through this transition. Finally, after a week of escalating messages, came the call that truly revealed the depth of their situation. Mom, Richard's voice was strained, all pretense of casual inquiry gone. We've received a foreclosure notice. The bank is giving us 30 days. We need to know if we can move in with you. Otherwise, I don't know what we'll do. The desperation in his voice was genuine. For all his financial industry expertise, Richard had overextended himself catastrophically. The partner track position he had been so confident about had clearly been less secure than he believed. Now he was facing the consequences of living beyond his means. I arranged to meet Richard alone at a cafe midway between our homes. He arrived looking haggard, the polished financial executive replaced by a man visibly stressed about his future. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sinking into the chair across from me. Things have been challenging. Tell me exactly what's happening, Richard, I said calmly. The complete truth this time. Perhaps it was my tone, or perhaps desperation had finally broken through his facade, but Richard actually gave me a straightforward account of his situation. He had been let go without the severance package he expected. The vacation home was underwater on its mortgage. The primary residence had multiple liens against it. Mason and Lily's private school was threatening to dismiss them for unpaid tuition. Credit card debt had spiraled out of control. Melinda's parents won't help? I asked, knowing they had significant resources. Richard's laugh was bitter. They said this was a character-building opportunity for us. That we need to learn to live within our means. As if they didn't give Melinda everything her entire life. I let his hypocrisy pass without comment. And what exactly are you asking of me, Richard? He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in years. I need a place for my family to live, Mom. I need time to rebuild my career without worrying about my children being homeless. I'm begging you. The word begging hung in the air between us. My son, who had once called me a burden, was now begging for my help. And if I agree, what would change? I asked quietly. Would I still be a burden to you, Richard? An obligation to be managed? Or does my worth as a person increase with my financial usefulness to you? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Mama, I know I've said things, done things. I've been under so much pressure, trying to maintain a certain lifestyle, trying to give my family everything. Everything except respect for their grandmother. I finished for him. Everything except gratitude for the woman who sacrificed her own dreams, so you could have yours. Tears formed in his eyes, whether from genuine remorse or simply the stress of his situation. I couldn't be sure. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I don't deserve your help. At least that much was honest. What about the grandchildren? I asked. Will they be allowed to have a relationship with me now? Or only as long as you need my housing? Richard winced. They miss you. Genuinely. I kept them from you, and that was wrong. I considered him for a long moment. The son I had raised, the baby I had held in my arms and promised to protect, the young man I had sacrificed everything for, sat before me broken by his own choices. What did I owe him now? What did I owe myself? I'll need to think about this, Richard. I'll let you know my decision tomorrow. As I drove home, I reflected on the strange reversal of our situations. Now Richard was the one facing housing insecurity, financial stress, an uncertain future. Now he was the one hoping someone would extend a helping hand regardless of the inconvenience. The difference was that I had never turned my back on him when he needed me. I had never called him a burden. I had never suggested he be warehoused in a facility to make my life easier. The question now was whether I could find it in my heart to be more generous than he had been. The next morning, I called Richard and asked him to bring his entire family to my home that evening. If we were going to discuss a potential living arrangement, all parties needed to be present, including the children. They arrived as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the front gardens. Mason and Lily hung back shyly, clearly coached on their behavior, but uncertain around this grandmother they barely knew. Children, I said warmly, kneeling despite my arthritic knees to meet them at eye level. I'm so happy to see you. Would you like to see the gardens? I have a koi pond with fish you can feed. Their eyes lit up, and after a quick glance at their parents for permission, they followed me eagerly to the back gardens. As the children delighted in tossing food pellets to the colorful fish, I observed them carefully. Mason, now 10, had Richard's serious demeanor, but broke into uninhibited laughter when the largest koi created a splash. Lily, 7, was a bundle of curious energy, full of questions about the flowers and butterflies. These were my grandchildren, innocent in the adult conflicts that had kept us apart. Whatever decision I made about Richard and Melinda would impact these children as well. After the garden tour and a simple dinner prepared by my housekeeper, I asked to speak with Richard and Melinda privately while the children watched a movie in the media room. I've given your situation a great deal of thought. I began once we were seated in my study. And I've come to a decision. They leaned forward, tension evident in their postures. I will not allow my grandchildren to be homeless or their education disrupted, I said firmly. However, I'm not prepared to have you move into this house permanently. Their faces fell slightly, but I continued before they could protest. Instead, I'm offering the following. I will purchase a modest 4-bedroom home in a good school district. You may live there rent-free for 1 year while Richard reestablishes his career. During that time, I expect to have unfettered access to my grandchildren, including regular visits and occasional overnight stays here. After the year is up, you will either begin paying market rate rent to me or find your own housing. Richard and Melinda exchanged glances, clearly having expected either outright rejection or the keys to my mansion. Additionally, I continued, I will cover Mason and Lily's school tuition directly with the institution, not through you. This arrangement is contingent upon family counseling, which I will also pay for. All 4 of you will attend, and Richard and I will have additional sessions to address the damage to our relationship. Mom, that's incredibly generous, but... Richard began. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. This arrangement comes with non-negotiable conditions. First, I will never again be referred to as a burden, either to my face or behind my back. Second, you will both acknowledge, verbally and in writing, that this assistance is a choice I am making out of love for my grandchildren, not an obligation. Third, you will commit to financial counseling and living within your means going forward. I will not finance a lifestyle of unsustainable luxury. Melinda's lips thinned with displeasure. You're treating us like children who need to be monitored and controlled.
No, Melinda.
I'm treating you like adults who have demonstrated poor judgment and are now facing the consequences. I'm offering a safety net, not a hammock. Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. We understand, Mom, and we're grateful for your help, whatever form it takes. Do you understand, Richard? Because I need absolute clarity between us. The way you treated me when you thought I had nothing was cruel and deeply hurtful. I haven't forgotten being called a burden. I haven't forgotten being told I should sell my possessions to pay for a state-run facility. I haven't forgotten being kept from my grandchildren. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I know, and I can't take any of that back. All I can do is try to be better going forward. For the kids, for you, for myself. I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. There was desperation there, certainly, but also what appeared to be genuine remorse. Very well. My lawyer will draw up the necessary paperwork. In the meantime, you're welcome to use the guest suite here until we find an appropriate house for you. Over the following weeks, an interesting transformation began. Richard and Melinda moved into the guest suite with the children, a temporary arrangement that nonetheless put us in daily contact. Initially, interactions were strained, with Melinda particularly resentful of our reduced circumstances. The children, however, blossomed. Free from the constant pressure of maintaining appearances, they revealed themselves as delightful, though somewhat spoiled, individuals. Mason had inherited my love of reading, and would often join me in the library. Lily discovered my piano and begged for lessons, which I happily arranged. Richard, stripped of his executive title and designer suits, gradually revealed glimpses of the son I remembered. He began helping with household projects, first awkwardly, then with increasing confidence. He spoke less about status and possessions, more about his hopes for rebuilding his career on a more ethical foundation. With my financial advisor's help, we found a suitable house for them, comfortable but not extravagant, in a neighborhood with excellent schools. I purchased it outright and had a formal agreement drawn up regarding the terms of their residence. Our family counseling sessions were difficult but necessary. In the safe space of the therapist's office, I was finally able to express the full depth of my hurt over years of neglect and dismissal. Do you know what it feels like to be called a burden by your own child? I asked Richard during one particularly intense session. To be treated as if your entire existence is an inconvenience? After everything I sacrificed to give you opportunities. Richard couldn't meet my eyes. I told myself I was being practical, he admitted, that I was making tough decisions about elder care. But the truth is I was selfish. You didn't fit into the image of success I was trying to project. And it was easier to blame you than to admit I was failing at the values you raised me with. These moments of honesty, painful as they were, began the slow process of healing. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. A recognition of the wounds on both sides. Melinda's participation in family counseling was initially reluctant, but a breakthrough came when the therapist had her discuss her own parents' emotional neglect beneath their financial generosity. They never said they were proud of me, she revealed, tears streaming down her face. Nothing was ever good enough. I thought if we had the right house, the right schools, the right social connections, maybe then. She couldn't finish the sentence. Slowly, a new family dynamic emerged. Not perfect, not without setbacks, but more honest and ultimately healthier. I established a foundation focusing on housing security for seniors, drawing on my own experience of near homelessness. The work became deeply fulfilling, a way to transform my pain into purpose. My friendship with Walter deepened into a sweet, late-life romance. At our age, we had no illusions or games, just genuine appreciation for finding connection when we least expected it. He joined our family gatherings occasionally, his warmth and wisdom adding another positive dimension to our healing circle. As the 1-year mark of our arrangement approached, Richard secured a position with a smaller financial firm specializing in ethical investments. The salary was significantly less than his previous compensation, but sufficient for a comfortable middle-class life. True to our agreement, he began paying rent, insisting on doing so despite my offer to extend the grace period. "I need to do this, Mom," he explained. "Not just because it's the right thing, but because I need to show myself and the kids that I can keep my commitments." My relationship with my grandchildren flourished. They spent weekends with me regularly, filling my home with the laughter and energy I had missed for so many years. I took them on educational trips, read them stories from my childhood, taught them to bake my famous apple pies. These simple joys, once denied to me, now became the highlights of my life. One evening, as I sat on my patio watching the sunset with Walter beside me, and the distant sounds of the children playing in the garden, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. "You know," Walter said, seemingly reading my thoughts, "there's an old saying that the best revenge is living well. But I think you've discovered something better than revenge." "What's that?" I asked, taking his hand in mine. "Reclaiming your dignity. Setting boundaries that honor your worth. That's not revenge, that's wisdom." I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. The inheritance had not changed my worth as a person, only my ability to ensure that worth was recognized and respected. The money had given me options, but the strength to use those options wisely had been within me all along, buried beneath years of accepting less than I deserved. Richard came out to the patio carrying a tray with coffee. This small gesture of service, once unimaginable from my status-conscious son, symbolized how far we had come. "Mason wants to know if you'll help him with his science project tomorrow," he said. "Something about growing crystals?" "I'd be delighted," I replied. "Tell him to bring his materials after school." Richard lingered, seeming to have something more to say. "Mom, I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry. Not just for the things I said and did when you needed help, but for all the years before that when I took you for granted." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The designer clothes and executive polish were gone, replaced by a simpler appearance and, I thought, a more authentic presence. "We can't change the past, Richard," I said gently, "but we can learn from it. I think we both have." He nodded, understanding that while forgiveness was a process, we were on the path. Later that night, alone in my beautiful home, I wrote in the journal I had begun keeping since my life's transformation. I reflected on the lessons of the past 2 years, the journey from feeling worthless to recognizing my innate value. I had learned that true wealth lies not in bank accounts but in self-respect and genuine relationships. That setting boundaries isn't selfish but necessary for healthy connections. That it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and rewrite the terms of your life. Most importantly, I had learned that while money can change circumstances, only courage changes dynamics. My inheritance had given me options, but it was my willingness to stand firm in my worth that had truly transformed my life and relationships. As I closed my journal, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I now faced life's imperfections from a place of strength and self-knowledge. The journey from burden to benefactor had been painful but ultimately liberating. I had reclaimed not just financial security but something far more precious, my sense of self-worth. And that was a treasure no one could ever take away again. What would you do if a family member, who once called you a burden, suddenly needed your help? Would you offer assistance with conditions like I did? Or would you make a different choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always recognize your own worth, regardless of what others might say.